for that time. So welcome to week 2. I hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving and that you're well rested and that you're ready to jump back into school this week. This week we're going to be continuing the writing process that we started last week. And last week we talked about the writing process and how it relates to the creative process. We also talked about the concept of perseverance and how the creative process requires perseverance in order to produce a polished final project. So we have to persevere through all of those stages in the process to produce that final project. So last week you came up with ideas and you conducted research about your role models. And specifically about how they have solved problems on the job. And you thought about how you might face similar problems in your future career. And then you also thought about some methods that your role models used for solving problems that you can then apply to those problems when you face them in your career. So you did brainstorming and you did researching. This week we're going to move into the next few steps, which are organizing and writing. So one thing that I really want to emphasize this week is that it is important to make sure that you turn in the best possible piece of writing that you can create. Even though this is the first version of our essay and we are going to be revising it and turning in another version later, I do not want you to turn in a rough draft, okay? It's a graded assignment. If you turn in a rough draft, your grade is going to reflect that it's a rough draft. If you have questions about how the assignment's going to be graded, be sure to look at the rubric that is an attached document with the assignment instructions. It'll show you exactly what we're going to be looking for when we're grading your paper. So keep this in mind. Even though it's a first version, it should not be a rough version. And there's a reason for this, okay? We want you to turn in your best possible work so that when you receive feedback from your peers and your instructor in week 3, the feedback you receive is not going to be on issues you already know how to fix. So for example, if you turn an essay this week and your thesis statement is not very well developed, but you already know how to write a good thesis statement. You just didn't really spend the time to do that in this version. Well, in next week, you're going to be getting a lot of comments on your thesis statement, but since you already know how to write a thesis statement, those won't really help you, okay? So that's just an example. You may or may not be comfortable with the thesis statement. But the idea is that it's just not helpful to get feedback on problems you already know how to solve. So if you submit the best possible version, the feedback you receive, hopefully, is going to help you build on what you already know. Now, on the other hand, keep in mind that the writing that you create this week is not going to be perfect, okay? It's the best possible version you can create now with the skills and the strengths you already have. But then after you receive feedback, you're going to work to build on those skills and bring the essay to another level. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind, not just when you're working on this essay, but in the future when you're working on other creative projects. The first version you create, even if it's the best version you can create at that time, can always be improved upon later. So last week was all about getting that information together and thinking critically about what you've learned. This week, we're going to take all of that information and your ideas, and we are going to convey it to a group of readers. And these readers are also known as your audience. So when you write your essay this week, you want to keep your audience in mind. And just to kind of give you a few examples of what audience is in case you're not really familiar with that word in relation to writing, the audience is just whoever is going to be reading your work, or if it's a piece of media, whoever's going to be kind of consuming that piece of media. So if you were to give a speech, for example, in an auditorium, all the people that are sitting in that auditorium are your audience. Or let's say you're a filmmaker, okay, and you're making a movie. Everyone who's going to go watch that movie is your audience. And most of the time what you want to do is you want to appeal to that audience. So let's say you are a filmmaker and you make animated films for children, okay? obviously your audience is going to be kids, right? Because that's who you want to go see the movie. But you also might consider the fact that the parents are the ones that bring kids to the movies. And that's why a lot of times movies like Pixar movies, sometimes they have some humor that will actually go over a kid's head because it's meant to appeal to both kids and the adults, the adult parents. Okay, so that's an example of audience. So when you write a paper, your audience is your readers. It's whoever is going to be reading that paper. So it's important to kind of consider who these readers are. In order to connect to them effectively, you need to know more about them. So you want to ask yourself some questions. What do they already know about your topic? Why should they even care about your topic? What biases might they have about your topic? What will they learn by reading your essay? And what do you hope that they will think, feel, or do after reading your essay? So you've already learned about audience and creative presentation, so we're not going into too much detail here because you should already be kind of familiar with the concept. Just keep in mind the audience is just as important to consider when you're writing an essay as it is if you were giving a presentation or if you were making a movie or a CD. You need to know who you are communicating with in order to communicate with them effectively. So once you've taken some time to consider these questions, think about how you can appeal to your specific audience with the tone that you use in your writing and the word choice that you use. Think about which details are going to resonate with that specific audience. And I'm going to leave the slideshow just for a minute. And kind of look at the assignment instructions. Can everyone see the assignment instructions on my screen now? Okay, cool. Just making sure something weird happened, but it's all good. Okay, so there are some specific, I don't want to say suggestions, but more of like criteria to follow when it comes to audience for this paper. Okay, so, and this information can be found in this middle column. For this assignment, you have 3 potential audiences to choose from. Okay, so you do have a choice, right? We've given you some choice here, but you are limited in that you must choose from one of these 3 specific audiences. So if you pick an audience that's not here, you're not going to be fulfilling the assignment instructions, okay? So let's take a look at the 3 choices. They are potential future employers. So these are people that you might want to work for one day. So it could be a company that you might want to work for, could be a person that you might want to work for. Another choice is industry connections. So these are people that you might network with in your future career. And then the last choice is your family. So what you want to do is pick one of these audiences, and then as you're writing, you want to be sure to appeal to that specific audience. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're fulfilling all of the assignment requirements. And we'll talk about those a little more in a bit. But you want to make sure that you are discussing work-related problems that your role model faced, methods used to solve those problems, what you learned from your role model about problems you may encounter and their possible solutions, and how you will use problem-solving methods you learned in order to persevere in your degree program and industry. So regardless of which audience you choose, you still need to make sure that your essay is focused on these 3 things, okay? So pick your audience, and then you can look down here with the required writing objectives at left that we just talked about. You might consider an angle to take when writing for this audience. Okay, so you might show your readers that you have studied the problem-solving methods of someone in your industry and that you have considered how you can use that knowledge to persevere on the job when the going gets tough. Or you could show that you are taking steps to become the kind of person who would be excellent to work with by learning methods to overcome problems that may arise in your career. Or you could show that you have considered the pitfalls of this industry and you have a plan in place for resolving any problems you encounter. So before you guys start writing your essay, be sure to come back and take a another look at this, double check it. So another thing that I want you to kind of think about when you are addressing your audience, this is not a letter that you're writing, okay? This is an essay. So even though you're writing with one of these three audiences in mind, you're not directly speaking to that audience. So if you choose your family, you choose your mother, you're not going to say, "Dear Mom," and address everything directly to your mom, okay? Because that's not an essay, it's a letter. What you want to do is make sure that you're using a tone and words that are appropriate. So for example, if you chose a family member, you wouldn't speak to them directly, but you would probably write in a more casual tone than, a tone you would use with a professional audience. And that's because, you know your family. They would expect you to speak to them in a casual manner. If you went and started speaking to them in a very professional, formal tone, they might think you were weird. So you want to consider your audience. If you were writing to potential future employers, obviously you wouldn't want to use a casual tone. You would want to use a much more formal tone to show that you are professional. Now with industry connections, you're probably also going to want to use, a more of a professional tone. But these people work in your industry. They're familiar with the terms and jargon that is used in your industry. So you probably wouldn't have to define some of that terminology. Whereas if your mother was your audience, she might not have any idea what that terminology is. So you might actually have to kind of explain some of those buzzwords that you use. So regardless of which audience you choose, the main thing to keep in mind is that it's going to affect the words you choose and the tone you use. And above all else, make sure that you're not speaking directly to your audience. Let's go back into the keynote. Okay, so we've talked a bit about audience for your essay, but I want to kind of just take a step back and just look at an essay. What is an essay? How can we define an essay? Does anybody have any ideas about a possible definition for an essay? When you guys think of essay, what comes to mind? Peter says it's an informative writing style. Is it not? It can be. Definitely can be informative. We'll talk a little bit more about different types of essays here in a minute. Anybody else have any ideas about what an essay actually is? A bunch of paragraphs. Well, yes, usually it's got multiple paragraphs. That's right. Anybody else have any ideas? A form of paper that includes a large amount of research. Certainly, it can include research. Sometimes it doesn't, though, depending upon the type of essay. Someone is Googling it. Yes, Google is always good for a definition. Nicholas says a written explanation or comparison to a problem or problems. Yes, definitely. You could write an essay about that. So kind of a lot of definitions getting thrown around. Exactly, Rochelle says Google will give you a lot of answers, not all of them correct. So what an essay is, you guys are kind of all on the right track, but this is our definition of an essay. It is a short piece of nonfiction writing on a particular subject. Okay, so let's kind of break this definition down a little. First of all, short. Okay, it is not a book, it is not a novel. Now, that being said, there are essays of all different lengths. You might have a 2-page essay, you might have a 6-page essay, you might have a 25-page essay. They can all be essays. It's also nonfiction writing, okay, which means it is not a story. It is filled with factual, truthful information. Oftentimes, it has research, but not all the time. And it's about one particular subject. Okay, so it's narrowly focused on one topic. And usually it's not just on one topic, it's on a particular aspect of one topic. So for example, if we wanted to write an essay on Taylor Swift, there is a ton of information out there about Taylor Swift, about how she, broke into the music industry, about her music itself, about the shows that she performs, about her relationships. There is just a ton of information out there on Taylor Swift. If we wrote one essay that included all this information, first of all, it wouldn't be short. It would be too long probably to be an essay. And second, it would be not very focused. We wouldn't really understand what the point of the essay is. So we have to narrow it down a bit. So for that example, we could narrow it down by writing an essay about why Taylor Swift chose to pull her music from Spotify, right? Because recently she pulled all of her music from Spotify, which is a free music streaming service. Okay, so that's an example of taking one topic, one person's entire career and life, and narrowing it down to one specific aspect. So hopefully the research that you did last week helped you narrow down your essay topic. So you started with a role model, and there's probably a lot of research out there about that role model's life, but you narrowed it down to a specific aspect, which is obstacles that role model faced, work-related obstacles, and methods he or she used to overcome those obstacles. Okay, so we've talked about what an essay is. Now we kind of have a working definition of an essay, but let's look at essay structure in a little bit more detail. So an essay starts with an introduction, okay? This is the first paragraph in your essay. The essay also includes support. These are the body paragraphs. And it ends with a conclusion, which is the last paragraph in your essay. All of these things are needed in a good essay, but I want to kind of talk about what type of information should go in each part. So in the introduction, you want to find a way to grab your reader's attention and make them want to know more about your topic. You also want to make sure that you introduce your topic so your readers know exactly what the essay is going to be about. So this is also where you're going to put your thesis statement, which is basically just that one sentence that explains exactly what the paper is going to be about. For this essay, a good thesis statement is going to mention your role model. It's going to mention that he or she has faced and overcome obstacles, and it's going to mention something about how you can learn from that. Okay? So that's the sentence that tells us exactly what to expect in the rest of the paper. So we want to grab readers' attention and we want to tell them what we're going to be talking about in the paper. But that's all that goes in the introduction. A really common mistake is that students will start developing their ideas in the introduction. So they'll start going into research, or they'll start explaining some of the main ideas in their paper in the introduction. But that's not what it's for. All it's for is introducing the topic. So all of the development of the ideas, that goes in the support, okay? That goes in the body paragraphs. So the support is where you bring in your research and start developing your topic. And depending upon your essay, there could be 3 paragraphs, there could be 5 paragraphs. It just depends on the information that you have to discuss. So the support, the body, is where you're going to expand upon all of your ideas. Now the conclusion is the last paragraph in your paper, and it's kind of where you sum up everything that you've already talked about. Another mistake that we often see students making is that they'll still be developing their ideas in their conclusion. In this specific essay, for example, students will take the last part of the essay, which is to talk about how you will apply what you learned, and they'll make that their conclusion instead of having an actual conclusion that wraps up the essay. That whole topic of how you apply what you learned is actually one of your main ideas, so it should go in a body paragraph, and then you should have another paragraph after that that sums up all the ideas you mentioned and kind of wraps up the paper. So one thing that's really important to remember about the conclusion is that we don't want to include any new information in the conclusion at all. Okay, all it's there for is to kind of remind the readers of what we already talked about and to kind of let them know the paper is ending. So this is a basic structure of an essay, and it can be used for a lot of different types of writing. You may have noticed that this structure is a bit similar to the paragraph structure that we talked about last week, where you have your main idea as the first sentence in the paragraph, then you have some supporting ideas in the next few sentences, and then you finish off with a sentence that wraps up the paragraph or possibly transitions into the next paragraph. So you'll kind of notice that, this is a structure that we're using on that smaller micro paragraph level, but we're also using it on the larger macro paper level, okay? So strong essays tend to follow this structure pretty closely in a lot of different aspects. Peter says, so the conclusion is like an after-action review. Yeah, I mean, you're basically just summing up what you've already said. You don't want to give any new information. As Professor Fox says, her high school English teacher used to describe the conclusion as landing the plane. It's supposed to let your readers know that the journey is over. Yeah, and I think that's a good way to put it. You guys will also kind of find that essays, not just essays, but a lot of other things follow the same format. If you're, reading a magazine article, usually there's an introduction, there's some ideas that are developed in the middle, and then there's a conclusion. So it's kind of a format you might be used to seeing, but you might not be as used to using, and you're getting practice doing that this month. Okay, so one thing is that while this structure may seem kind of simple, or it might seem kind of like, oh, yeah, that makes sense because I've seen it before, it can be actually a little bit difficult actually getting your ideas into this structure. So for that, we need to do a bit of planning and organizing, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later in the lecture. But first, I want to refresh your memory about what the components of this essay should be. Okay, so if you read over the assignment sheet, then you should know that your essay should have a specific focus. And I'm hoping that everyone has read over the assignment sheet by now. If you haven't, you should do so right away. But the focus of this essay is very specific. You want to discuss what you discovered about how your role model persevered against setbacks, obstacles, and failure. You want to discuss what you learned about perseverance from reading about your role model's examples. And you want to discuss how you plan to apply what you learned to achieve your own personal goals. Okay, so as you can see, very specific. It's not just about your role model. I really want to emphasize that this is not a biography on your role model, okay? We're focusing on work-related obstacles here. You don't want to give us the life story. You don't want to just list successes your role model has had. We don't need to hear about your role model's childhood relationships, personal relationships, relationships with their parents, unless they happen to be job-related relationships. The focus should be on the perseverance your role model has shown and how you can do the same in the future. So if you found that with your research, you mostly have biographical information and you don't have a lot of information about these very specific things that you want to focus on, then you might need to go back to your research and actually find some new sources, okay? In some scenarios, you might actually have to pick a different role model. If you think that you may need to do that, you might want to reach out to your instructor just to make sure that that is good before you do that. But the research that you're doing, it's kind of like the start of the research project. Sometimes we find that the sources we found don't actually suit our needs, and sometimes we have to go back and look for other sources. So just keep that in mind, that we really are looking for a very focused essay here. Also, when you're talking about the perseverance strategies that your role model used in your essay, you want to make sure that you're discussing concrete methods for solving problems, okay? So we tend to see a lot of students saying that their role model overcame their problem with hard work, determination, and that they followed their dreams. Well, that sounds great, but it's not concrete, okay? It's not a specific way that they solved the problem. Hard work is not a perseverance strategy. A lot of people work hard, but not all people are able to overcome obstacles. You can also work hard at the complete wrong task, right? And that's not going to help you solve the problem if you're putting all of your energy, you're focusing all of your energy in the wrong place. So if they're working hard, as Professor Fox said, what exactly are they working hard at? What specific actions are they taking to overcome that problem? Same thing with following your dreams. I mean, following your dreams sounds great, but it's really vague. What did they do to follow their dreams? What specific actions did they take? The other thing you want to keep in mind is that your essay should be fairly well balanced when you're talking about these three aspects, okay? You don't want to spend the entire essay discussing problems your role model faced and then include one sentence at the end about how you can apply what you learned, because it's not balanced. Additionally, you want to keep in mind that these ideas that we're talking about here, this is what's going to go into your body paragraphs, okay? These are your supporting ideas. These shouldn't go into your introduction or your conclusion. As we talked about, the introduction just grabs the reader's attention and introduces the main idea. Then you move into addressing these topics, which are in the body paragraphs, and then you move on to the conclusion, which is going to wrap everything up. And I did kind of skip over some information with the essay, guys, so I want to step back a little bit before we look at organizing your essay. But just talking about the definition of an essay, we looked at that definition. You may have noticed that it didn't say anything about a specific format, and it didn't say anything about a specific method of delivery, or whether it's a narrative essay, an informative essay, or a persuasive essay. I think one of you mentioned something about narrative. Those are kind of three different types of essays you can write. A narrative essay basically tells a story. Usually when you're writing about yourself, it's a narrative essay, right? Because you're telling your story or something about yourself. Informative essays, on the other hand, they educate your reader in some way by delivering information. And a lot of times these are the essays that are going to include the outside research. And then persuasive essays, they deliver information, but they're also meant to convince your reader and possibly get them to take a desired action. Okay, so those are kind of three writing strategies that you can use in an essay: narrative, informative, and persuasive. But you'll find that most essays actually have some aspects of each of these writing strategies. So for this assignment, you want to write an essay that is a mix of narrative and informative, okay? You're going to be sharing information about your role model that you found in your research. This information is meant to be informative. So that's the informative aspect of your essay. But you're also going to be talking about how you can use what you learned in your future career, okay? And that is the narrative part of your essay. So this month you have kind of an essay that is a mix. So when you think about an essay, you might think about an assignment for English class, like the one that we're writing today, or you might think about another school assignment or a discussion post or something like that. But essays come in a lot of forms. Like I said before, kind of like a magazine article can be an essay, a newspaper article can be an essay, a documentary can be kind of like a visual essay. So essays come in a lot of forms, and learning how to write one is actually something that can help you a lot. After you leave this class, you might have to write essays in future classes. In your career, you might have to write creative projects. So this basic structure, the essay structure, once you have it down, you can use it as a basis for a lot of other projects. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about organizing your essay. We talked about how it has to be balanced, or it should be balanced, but how do we achieve that? Hopefully you've been thinking about the research you did last week, and hopefully you have a lot of ideas that you want to include in your essay. Okay, so you might be feeling a little overwhelmed with all that stuff. So what we want to do is take some time to organize it so that when we write it down, it's going to be clear to our readers. So when it comes time to write your essay, there are a couple of things you want to do. First of all, you're going to want to plan how you're going to organize your ideas before you start writing. Okay, so figure out which method you're going to use to organize your ideas. There are a couple different methods you can use, and each writer seems to have their own method that works well for them. Some writers like to create an outline, like a very detailed, formal outline, so they know exactly what information is going to be in which paragraph, where all their research is going to go. They take the time to create this before they even sit down to draft. Other writers who might have kind of a pretty good idea already of what they want to say, they might not spend so much time at the beginning. They might just kind of have that idea of what they want to say, jump right in, and then they might come afterwards, after they've written, and take a second look at organization and move their ideas around to make sure that they have a solid organization. And then other writers, kind of might be in between. They might just jot down some quick notes. This is what I'm going to talk about in the introduction. These are the 3 ideas I'm going to discuss in the body, and this is kind of what I'm going to say in the conclusion. And then they start writing. So you might find one of these is best for you. You might also find that, one of these might work really well with one assignment, but with another assignment, you need to be a little bit more detailed. It kind of depends on what kind of an essay you're working with. So if you're writing about something you're very familiar with, maybe, writing about your life or something like that, you might be able to just dive right in and organize later. But if it's a topic where you've had to do a lot of research, you didn't know much about it to begin with, and you have a lot of sources to organize, you might find that taking that time to write the formal outline is better and helps you a lot more when you sit down to draft your work. So either way you do it, just take some time to think about how you're going to organize it to help you make sure that you have your information in the right places. So quick question. When you sit down to write your essay, which part of the essay do you think you guys should write first? Introduction, body paragraphs, or conclusion? Matthew says a body. Anybody else have any ideas about where they might start? Body. All right, looks like everyone says the body, and you guys are absolutely correct. You can't really start with the introduction if you haven't written the body yet, because you don't know what you're introducing yet. You want to know what the main content of your essay is going to be so that you can draw readers into it effectively and so that you can wrap it up effectively at the end. So when you're organizing what you're going to say, it's a good idea to kind of organize and plan out what you're going to say in that body, write the body, and then kind of go back and organize and plan your introduction and your conclusion, okay? And make sure that your thesis statement is matching all of that information that you included in the body. So you guys are already on the right track with that, which is awesome. So let's talk more about how you can develop those body paragraphs, those main ideas in your essay. There's a few different ways to do this, and the way that you choose is going to depend upon the information that you found in your research. Okay, so this is one method. So you could, let's say that for this essay, you know that you can either choose one problem that your role model faced and discuss 3 methods used to solve that problem, or you can choose 3 problems your role model faced and 1 method used to discuss each problem, okay? So if you went the first way and you decided to discuss 1 problem they faced and how they overcame that problem, you might use a structure like this. So in your first body paragraph, after your introduction, of course, and maybe even your first or second, it depends how many paragraphs you need to fully explain the topic, but you would start out by examining the specific ways that your role model has solved a problem in order to persevere in pursuit of his career goals. So that would be the main ideas in either your first or your first few paragraphs. Then you would move on to the next main idea, which is to evaluate what you have learned about how to persevere from reading about your role model's examples. So that might take 1 or a couple paragraphs, depending upon how much you have to say. And then you would move down to explaining how you can use what you have learned to achieve your own career goals. And again, that might take one paragraph or it might take a couple, okay? So this is one way you can organize it. You can also organize it this way. And this way works really well if you have multiple problems to discuss. So in your first body paragraph, or your first couple body paragraphs, you could discuss what the problem was, what you have and how they fixed it, what you have learned from the example, and how you will apply it. Okay, then you could move on to the next body paragraph, talk about the second problem, what you learned from the second problem, and how you can apply that. And then you can move on to the third one, talk about the third problem, how they solved it, what you learned from it, and how you can apply it. Okay, so those are two different methods for organizing the essay, and it's going to be up to you to determine which one you want to use. It's important to kind of take a look at your research and the information that you want to convey in the essay when you're picking out how you want to organize these body paragraphs. Okay, so far we've looked at the audience of your essay, and we've talked about organization, how to organize your ideas in the essay. But now we're going to look at how we can use research in the essay. And this is sometimes a little bit tricky for students, incorporating research into their work. The big thing that I want you to remember is that your ideas should come first, okay? Research is support. It supports your ideas. It should not replace your ideas. It's kind of like your backup. It helps you. It strengthens your ideas, but it doesn't stand in place of your ideas. It helps make your ideas more credible. So I think sometimes students feel nervous about including their own thoughts in their writing. Maybe in a previous class, you were told that you should stick with the research or, rely on facts from the research or from the experts. But especially for this essay, we really want to know what your reactions are to what you've learned, okay? What ideas have you come up with from the research? You are going to have a unique approach to what you've learned. You're the only one who's going to have the ideas. The whole point of writing an essay is so that you can include your own personal thoughts and your own knowledge in the writing. So for this particular essay, it's not just about what you've learned, but it's also about how you will apply what you've learned, which we've already kind of talked about. So I expect you to use the words I and me in your essay. And again, you may have been taught in a previous class, well, this is an academic essay. I should never speak in the first person. I should never say I or me. Well, it depends on what type of essay you're writing. And for this specific essay, I do want to know, what you learned and what you intend to do with what you learned. So I want to hear sentences like, I will do this in the future, or I have learned this from my role models' problems. Show me that you're engaging with what you've learned. All right, we know it's important now that we include our own ideas in the essay, but research can help us back up our ideas if we use it well in the essay. So I want to talk about how you can incorporate research into your writing without making it seem clunky or out of place, and also making sure that you are citing your sources correctly. And yes, this sandwich metaphor, quote sandwich, is probably going to make you guys hungry. This is a BLT sandwich, as you can probably tell. So we're going to look at each part of this sandwich. Each ingredient is in the sandwich as a part of how we're going to use our research in the essay. So let's kind of break it down. It's called the quote sandwich. So the first ingredient in our quote sandwich is the top slice of bread. This is the setup, okay? This is our main point. It's your idea, your original idea, which may be an argument, an explanation, or a fact, okay? And we're going to use research in the next ingredient that's going to back up this fact. But right now, this is our idea. So the example here is a BLT is extremely hard to resist because humans are chemically drawn to bacon. So whoever wrote this is their idea, okay? So now we need our next ingredient, which is the tomato. which is the introduction. And this introduces our research, okay? It's going to introduce the author where we're pulling our research that's going to help back up our idea. You don't want to leave the reader guessing about the origin of the quotation. You want to clearly identify who that author is. So, for example, according to Elin Roberts, I don't know if that's Elin or Ellen, but I prefer Elin, so that's what I'm going to say. According to Elin Roberts, now we know who's going to say the quote that we're going to add in the next ingredient, Elin Roberts. Next ingredient is the lettuce. This is our authority, okay? This provides the author's credential or authority. It shows us why they are an expert in the field. Why should we pay attention to what Elin Roberts is saying about bacon? According to Elin Roberts, head of public engagement at the Center for Life in Newcastle. Okay, so now we know a little bit more about this person and why they might be qualified to talk about bacon. But we're not done yet, right? We haven't included the research yet. What did Elin Roberts say that helps us back up the idea that a BLT is extremely hard to resist because humans are chemically drawn to bacon? This is where we bring in our quotation. This is the bacon, the meat, the good stuff. For you vegetarians, this is, I don't know, seitan or soy vegetable protein bacon. It doesn't have to be regular bacon, but it's the good stuff. It's, yeah, the seaweed bacon, as Professor Fox says. So this is the author's exact words. This is what is going to back up our idea. So we want to make sure that it is relevant and to the point and that it lends credence to our original idea, okay? So you want thick, crunchy, gourmet bacon or veggie bacon. You don't want processed, floppy, value bacon, okay? So you want to make sure that you're pulling a quote from your source that actually backs up your idea. You don't want to just skim through your source and pull any quote just so you can say, I put research in my paper. You want to find something that helps you prove your point. So for example, Elin's quote says, the smell of sizzling bacon in a pan is enough to tempt even the staunchest of vegetarians. There's something deeper going on inside. It's not just the idea of a tasty snack. There is some complex chemistry going on. Okay, so this quote backs up our idea that a BLT is hard to resist because humans are chemically drawn to bacon. But we're not done yet, okay? We need the mayo. The mayo is the quotation marks. These are the marks that go around the quotation that show us that we're pulling exact words from the source. Okay, if we don't have quotation marks, we cannot use the exact same word for the source. We would have to put it into our own words, and that would be a paraphrase or a summary. But this is a quotation we're using. So we have to include those quotation marks. And they should go exactly around the words that we're pulling from the outside source. So we've got our mayo. We're almost done with the sandwich. Now we need the bottom slice of toast, which is what we refer to as the significance, okay? So this explains the quotation's relevance to the point we are trying to make. We picked this quote for a reason. We have to kind of say why. How does it support the argument, and what is its significance? So for example, bacon's appeal is not just in the taste buds. The scent actually penetrates the brain with chemical messages that scream, I'm yummy. Okay? So we've kind of elaborated on what she said here and explained, why. But alas, we are still not done. We need to clean up, okay? We need our napkin, which is the citation. Okay, this is your in-text citation, which indicates that the quote comes from a source, not from the writer. So it's not your idea, it came from an outside source. It says to the reader, use this reference to learn more about the quotation's author and his or her work. Oh, sorry guys, I skipped past it, but I'm just going to show you on this slide. It's right here where it says, as quoted in Jamieson, 2009, para 6, okay? So this part right here is the in-text citation, this part that is in the parentheses. And this one is going to look a little bit different because, as you know, Elin Roberts is the person who said this. However, we did not get this from an article that Elin Roberts wrote. Instead, we got this from Jameson's article. Okay, so Jameson was quoting Elin Roberts in his or her article. So when we cite the quote, we need to make sure that we cite the source we got it from, which is the Jameson. So for this particular example, we would use the phrase as quoted in Jameson to show that we got the Elin Roberts quote from the Jameson source. However, this doesn't happen a lot. Most of the time, the quote or the idea is going to come from the direct source, okay? So it's not always going to look like this where it says as quoted in. This is only if a source is quoting another source. You'll also notice that the in-text citation includes the year of publication, and it includes a page or paragraph number. Here it's para 6. The reason that we don't have a page number is because this came from an online source, and often online sources do not have page numbers, but we still need to show exactly where we got that quote, so instead we cite the paragraph number where we found that quote. The other thing I want you to kind of notice is that the period goes here after the citation, okay? You can think of the citation, everything in parentheses, as part of the sentence. The reason why we include it in the sentence is because we want to show that it's attached to this quote. We want to show that it's directly where they came from, where it came from. And as Professor Fox is saying, you need to count paragraphs. Yes, they're not ever really numbered for you, so you have to count them. I did find out recently that the only exception to this is if you're citing information from an ebook that is not does not have pagination, does not have pages, they do not expect you to count through the paragraphs in the ebook. So in that case, you would not need to include a page number, paragraph number. However, for the sources you guys are going to be using for this particular assignment, you're probably not going to be using an ebook, so you don't have to worry about that. But it's something you might want to know. Fun fact trivia for a future class. Okay, so we're still not done yet. Now we need our plate, okay, that everything goes on. The sandwich, the mayo, the bacon, the seaweed bacon, all that stuff. We need a plate, okay? So the plate is our reference list, our reference entry. This has all the information the reader needs to further investigate the quotation, including the author, where it came from, when it was written, and how to find it. Okay, and the references go at the end of your essay. So in the in-text citation, we just had the author's name, the year, and maybe the page number or paragraph number if it's a direct quote. That's not enough information for, your reader to go and find that source. Just a last name and a year, that's really not going to help them. So we need to also have a reference list that has additional publication information that shows them exactly where they can find that source. So for example, Jameson A, the year, the title of the article, and where we got it from, which is a URL. And we're going to look at the reference list entry in a little bit more detail. But this is our final step in the quote sandwich. Keep in mind that you have to have in-text citations and the reference list entry working together, okay? So if you have an in-text citation for one source in your paper, you must have a reference list entry for that source. I see a lot of times when students will turn in a paper and they'll have 3 sources listed in their references list, and only one of those sources will be cited in the paper. So that leaves me wondering, okay, did they use these other sources? Is there information that's not cited in the paper? Did they not use these sources? Why are they just thrown in at the end? They have to match, okay? You have to have at least one in-text citation for every reference list reference entry that's in your list, okay? And every single piece of information from a reference has to be cited in text. They work together. The in-text citation tells you which author or which source that piece of information came from, and then the reference list shows your reader where they can go and find that source. So let's just talk about a little bit more about APA style in general, because you guys might be feeling a little bit nervous about using it, especially if you haven't used it before. It is something that you're going to be using throughout your time here at Full Sail, so it makes sense to kind of try to wrap your head around it as much as possible, practice with it as much as possible, so you have fewer problems with it when you encounter it in later classes. The first thing that I want you to think about, citations are not difficult, okay? They're not hard, but they do require attention to detail. There are a lot of silly, small formatting rules, okay? Even I'm going to admit I feel like some of them are silly, but we have to follow them. The important thing to remember is that you do not need to memorize all of those rules. I am an English instructor. I have been tutoring students at the Writing Center for almost 5 years now. I help students with APA on a daily basis. Even I don't know every single APA rule. There's sometimes when a student asks me a question and I have to go and look it up. It's not meant to be something that you memorize, okay? What you want to do is make sure that you understand that there are specific formatting rules, and you want to have a good resource that you can go and look for examples and check your work against. Also keep in mind that the purpose of APA is to give credit to sources in a logical, globally understood way. Okay, so sometimes students will be like, why do we have to do this? Like, why? Why do we all have to do this exactly the same? We want to make it consistent so that it's easy for our readers to identify the pertinent information. So that's a lot easier if everyone's doing it the same way, and you don't have Sally doing it one way, John doing it another way, Nicole doing it another way. Exactly. Peter says it helps to be able to speak the global language. And the other thing that I want to remind you is that understanding how to cite sources, it's going to help you definitely in your future classes, because you're going to have to use it. I think in every class in Full Sail, you have at least one library assignment where you have to include research, even if it's just like a discussion post or something. So you definitely could be using it while you're here at Full Sail. But you also, when you're practicing APA, it can help you in your future career, okay? And this is true even if you never cite sources in APA in your career. You get practice at following a specific style, okay? And you're paying attention to detail. You're practicing doing that, and that can be useful in your future. In your future job, you're probably going to encounter specific style guides, ways that a company expects you to document information and communicate with your peers. So this is just kind of giving you practice doing that. As I mentioned, and it's worth reiterating, APA citation has two parts. It has the in-text citation and the reference list entry. You absolutely have to have both. If you turn in a paper that has no in-text citations and 5 references at the end of the paper, you might think, well, I cited my sources because I included all those references. No, because there's no in-text citations. I have no idea where you use that information in your paper, and that could actually be considered plagiarism. So make sure that you have both. Let's look at a little bit more detail about the format and how to create the references page. First of all, it's going to be on a separate page at the very end of your document. It's the last page in your document, so you're going to finish off with your conclusion, then you're going to space down to a new page and include your references list. Each entry is going to include detailed information about the particular source, so it'll include the author, date of publication, article title, and hyperlink if it's, a website. If it's a book or something else, it's going to include other types of publication information, like the name of the publisher and the location of the publisher. The reference page allows your readers to find the source and investigate further, which we already kind of talked about. And one thing that you really need to remember is whether you have copied words from a source directly, like a direct quotation, or whether you have used ideas or information from a source and put it into your own words, like a paraphrase or summary, you must have a reference entry for it on your reference page. Now, sometimes it's a good idea to work on your references page first. So, get all of that information together and create the references page. you have already worked on collecting research. For week 1 assignment, you've already collected a lot of the publication information that you need to create the references entry or reference entries. So now it's just a matter of plugging that information in. Okay, so finding an example for the type of source you have and then plugging in the information so that you have it in APA style. Okay, so it's actually pretty easy. You've already done the hard work. One thing that I will warn you about if you do your references page first, sometimes students will create the references page and they'll go write their paper and they won't actually use information from all their references. Maybe they'll just cite information from one reference and they don't end up using, their 4th reference at all or their 3rd reference at all, but yet they still leave it in there. Make sure that if you decide to take a reference out of your paper and maybe you add a different one in, make sure you adjust that on your references page before you turn in your assignment. Because I'll reiterate again, the in-text citations need to match up with the reference list entries. So what do they look like? What are the parts of a reference entry? It's broken down into 4 basic components. This might make it a little easier for you to think about what type of information you need to include. Who, when, what, and where. Okay, so the who is the author. You'll notice that in APA style, we use the author's last name followed by the first initial. So there's no need to spell out the author's first name, okay? We only need the first initial. So that's the who. The when is the date. When was this published? Now, most of the time, you're just going to need the year here, okay? The exception to that is if you are citing a source that is periodical, meaning that it comes out on a regular basis. So an example of a periodical source would be a newspaper or a magazine, a journal, something that's coming out on a periodic basis. And for those, what you want to do is include the month, date, and year. Okay, but if it's just a static website that doesn't come out on a regular basis or a book, that came out once, you just want to include the year here for the date. So that's the when part. The what part is the title of the article. What are we referencing? Where did we pull from? So you would include the title of the article. Notice that there's some wonky capitalization going on here. With APA style article titles, we use something called sentence case, okay? So it's like how you would capitalize a sentence. The first letter of the first word in the article gets capitalized, and any other word starts with a lowercase letter, okay? There are a couple exceptions to that. The first one is if there's a proper noun. So if Taylor Swift was part of the title of the article, since her name is a proper noun, you would capitalize that. The other exception is if there's punctuation, like if there was a colon here and then there was more information that came after it in the title, you would again capitalize the first letter of that first word. And then if it's from a magazine or journal, you would include that. This is the where part of the citation. Where can they find that information? And then additional publishing information. Often this is the part of the citation that is going to be different depending upon the type of source you have. So if you have a print source, this is often going to be the name of the publisher and the location of the publisher. If you have an online source, this is going to be the words retrieved from followed by the URL for that source. So it's important to figure out what type of source you have when determining what type of information is going to go here. And this is an example. This is a citation from The Empire Strikes Back. As you can see, we've only included the author's first initials and the last name. We have a year. In this case, we have 2 creators. One's a director, one's a producer, so we've had to note that in the parentheses. The title of the movie is in sentence case, as we discussed, and then we have the publisher and the location. So that's what a reference list entry looks like. We'll also go ahead and talk about in-text citations in a little bit more detail. They go in the text of your essay, okay, in the same sentence that you are citing. So one thing that I see students doing a lot is they will have a paragraph that has 10 or that says it has 11 sentences in it, okay? So a paragraph with 11 sentences, and they'll put one citation in the 11th sentence, and all of the information in that paragraph came from an outside source. It's not enough to write a whole paragraph and put one citation at the very end, because that tells me that that last sentence came from that source, but I really have no idea about all the sentences that came before it. Okay? So there is kind of a trick to doing this if you're using the same source in multiple sentences in your paragraph. You can start off your first sentence that came from the outside source with a citation. And then if you're going to, in the next sentence, also be discussing another idea that came from that same source, say let's say the source is Smith. So you have one idea from Smith, you have the citation for Smith, then the next sentence also comes from Smith. You can say something like, Smith goes on to say that, right? Because that little phrase kind of connects it to that previous in-text citation and lets us know that we're continuing with that same author. So keep that in mind when you're creating your in-text citations. As Professor Fox says, citations help reader distinguish between your ideas and the ideas that came from research. Yes. Also, in-text citations are short, so they don't interrupt the flow of your writing. And this is why we don't include all of that publication information or URLs or any of those things in the in-text citation, because that would make it hard for your reader to follow your train of thought. They would get distracted by all that stuff. We include all that stuff in the reference list so they can refer to it later. The in-text citations go in the parentheses immediately after the quotation. You've seen an example of that, but we'll look at another one. And they mark which ideas, words, etc. came from the outside source. And as we've mentioned before, they should align with the reference page citations. Okay, so this is what a basic in-text citation looks like. It's a lot more simple than the reference list. All we need is the who and the when. We need the author's last name and the year. Notice that we did not include the initial of the first name here. We don't need that for the in-text citation. We only need the last name. Also, notice that we don't have anything for the date except for the year. Okay, so even if it is a periodical document where you've included the date and the month in the reference list entry, you only need the year for the in-text citation. So let's take a look at what they kind of look like when they're incorporated into a sentence. So there's kind of two ways to do it. This first example is what we call an end of sentence citation. Okay, so all of the citation information is included at the end of the sentence in the parentheses. Although citing research is not difficult, it can be tedious. Watkins, 2014. This tells us that this idea came from Watkins, and it came from something she published in 2014. Again, notice that this is part of the sentence, right? The period comes after the citation. This connects it to the previous sentence. Another way that we can do it is by using something called an attribution phrase. Okay, and this is where we include the author's name in the actual sentence instead of in the parentheses. So as world-renowned English teaching sensation Amy Watkins, 2014 says, APA citation is tedious, but it isn't hard. And then we have the page number, and then we end with the period after the citation. So when you're using the attribution phrases, you want the author's name to be in the actual sentence, not in the parentheses. You want to include the date in the parentheses immediately after the author's name, followed by the quote, and then followed by the page or paragraph number at the very end. So you can use either, okay? You can use the end of sentence method or you can use the attribution phrase method. It's up to you. A lot of times a combination of the two works well, helps the writing flow a little bit better, but it's up to you which one you want to use. Okay, so we've looked pretty in depth at in-text citations and reference list entries, but I know you guys are bound to have a lot more questions about it. So we've provided a lot of APA resources in the course to further assist you. The first one is projectapa.info, and this is a website created by one of our English instructors, Jenny Donovan. It's a really awesome website specifically for Full Sail students because she The way she picked the information for the site was by looking at the types of citation that you guys usually have to do in your assignments. So it's kind of a little bit more streamlined than some of the other sites, and it's a little bit easier to find the information that you need. So I highly recommend projectapa.info. There is also an APA Basics booklet on the course site, which I'm going to show you in a minute. But it's basically an entire lesson on APA. So if you're new to APA and you're completely lost, that is a great place to start. Another really good resource is the Purdue University Online Writing Lab, also called the OWL at Purdue, the APA Formatting and Style Guide. If you Google OWL APA, it's probably going to be the very first hit. But the OWL APA guide is basically just the APA manual condensed on a website. So it tends to have a lot more information than the projectapa.info page. So if you're looking for something and you can't find it on projectapa.info, I would suggest heading over to the OWL because there's some additional information on that site. And then the last resource that's available to you, we have talked about it before, but it's a Full Sail Writing Center. They can, in addition to helping you with your grammar and your structure and your focus, development, all of that stuff, they can also help you with APA. So if you have a question about APA or you kind of want to review your sources, feel free to contact the Writing Center and set up an appointment. So let's quickly look at some of those APA resources before I let you guys go so you know where they are. The first one is the APA Basics What You Need to Know document, and you can find this in the Week 2 assignment instructions page. It's one of the downloads. I hope you guys look at those downloads because there's a lot of resources there that are meant to help you with the assignments. But as you can see, this just kind of goes through all the basics that you would need to know about APA. So what is it? Why do we use it at Full Sail? What exactly needs to be cited? Quotes, paraphrases, summaries. What's an in-text citation? Why do we need them? Reference list entry. So it goes into detail about reference list entries, even more detail than what we talked about today. And same thing with in-text citations. And I think at the bottom there's also some formatting issues. So what should your paper look like? If you aren't really sure about the formatting, if that's something you're a little bit confused about, there's another resource, which is a visual guide to APA document format. And this is also found under that Week 2 assignment. And it shows you exactly what your title page should look like. So you can see exactly what your the first page of your paper should look like, examples of how to use an attribution phrase, in-text citation, and an example of what your references page should look like. So when you're done with your paper, open up this document and compare it and see if they match. Now, the last thing that I want you guys to check out, if you haven't already, is the Academic Honesty Severity OOPS Matrix. Okay, this was part of the professionalism assignment. You should still have access to it. It was a download for that assignment, but it kind of explains to you exactly what is considered to be plagiarism at Full Sail and what the consequences are if you have plagiarized your work. Sometimes students will think, well, I didn't know any better. That doesn't really excuse you from it. Okay, first of all, we're going over all of this in class, so you guys should have this information. But I didn't know, and so I didn't cite anything. It doesn't really work. It could still be considered plagiarism. Now, that being said, if you show us that you have made an attempt to cite your sources, you've included in-text citations, you've included reference list entries, but maybe there's, some of the information in the reference list entry is in the wrong order, or maybe, you're missing a citation here, but you have, one here, or maybe you're not including the year or the author's last name or something. If it's errors like that, and we see that you're trying, but maybe you just don't understand exactly how, we don't consider that citation. And we're going to give you feedback that will help you fix those errors for your revision. Okay, so just kind of review this document when you have time, just to make sure that you're not doing any of these things before you turn in your assignment. And lastly, if you guys are confused about APA at all, which you might be, it's natural to have questions about it. Be sure to reach out to your instructor because they can really help you. You can even, send them an example of an in-text citation or of a reference list entry that you're not sure about, and you can ask them if you're doing it correctly, and they'll give you feedback. Now, I will say that if you want to reach out to your instructor, do so, before the weekend, right? Don't do it on Sunday night because they're probably not going to get your message. I think noon on Friday is usually a good time to aim for. That gives them time to get your message and time to respond to it before you start working on your assignments over the weekend. So don't be afraid to contact your instructor for assistance with APA or with any part of this assignment. We are here to help. I think that's pretty much all I have for you guys. So at this time, if you have questions, please feel free to answer, and either myself or Rochelle will help you out. You can either type your question out in the chat box, or if you are brave and you want to ask out loud, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you. Additionally, if you guys, feel like your brain hurts maybe a little after all this and you want to go stew on it a little bit, let me know that you're all good. And you're welcome to go start working on your homework or whatever else you have to do tonight. Anybody have any questions? You're welcome, Vincent. I hope it was helpful. You're welcome, Harmony. Good. All right, well, it doesn't seem like we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I am going to hang out for a few more minutes in case, someone's trying to type out a question. I don't want to miss your question.